Well, hello everyone. Steven here with Career Launch along with Sean and Yuli, and I am super excited about today's live session. We have our special guest with us who is going to share her journey using the Career Launch method. Of course, we have the founder of Career Launch who's going to chime in and share some points from what he saw as Yuli got to go through this. So, first off, Yuli, welcome to the live stream. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
No, we're definitely excited to have you on here. I think it'd be really helpful to let everyone know, when did you first take Sean's class?
Yeah, so I was in Sean's class at Santa Clara University my freshman year. It was one of my first business courses, and so I've known him since then.
Awesome. And Sean, do you remember Yuli as a student?
I do. One of the advantages of teaching at a private school compared to Berkeley is that smaller class sizes. So I have the opportunity to get to know students on a personal basis. Yeah, so I definitely remember Yuli as a student, and it's been really, really fun to watch her journey ever since.
That's so awesome. And Yuli, so let's talk about this. How did you end up in Sean's class?
Well, I was a business major going into Santa Clara University, and we're asked to do 3 initial business courses when we were business students there. And one of them was the Business 71 class, where the idea is to put into practice some of what you're learning and start to build, some sort of business skills. So that's how I ended up in Sean's class and started working the Career Launch method before it was called that.
Yeah. Back then, what was it, Sean? What was it called back then when you first started?
Yeah, so Yuli, I don't want to, I've been teaching 10 years now, and the Career Launch method was given a name about 3 to 4 years ago, I guess now. So yeah, prior to Yuli taking the class, yeah, there was no name. I was teaching the methodology, but it wasn't named. And so it's been really exciting. So for anyone tuning in for the first time, Career Launch is a social enterprise. We are focused on helping other colleges and universities and career programs scale their impact of teaching a holistic job search, especially for students who have few to no connections. And as we grow our partnerships across the country, we want to also have an ability to engage with students directly in case their universities or colleges are not a current partner of ours. So we created this live stream to be of service to students who want to know about the Career Launch method and understand the programming and meet really interesting people like Yuli and hear her story. So I just wanted to set a little background as far as how this all came together.
Yeah, awesome. So Yuli, let's talk about your story because I'm very curious here. Where are you from?
So I'm from Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
First gen student, went to Santa Clara University.
Okay, so you were first gen student. How did you end up in Santa Clara?
I went to a private high school over here in Washington, and Santa Clara does a lot of recruiting from my school. So that's how I heard about Santa Clara. But then when I went to visit, heard about, the business program it has, the location, being in Silicon Valley, being a smaller school, it checked off all the boxes of what I was looking for in a university experience.
That's fantastic. And so I have to ask, did you know exactly what you wanted to do when you got into college? Like, did you know what you wanted to get into?
I knew I wanted to do business. My
Okay.
family owns restaurants and bakeries. So, I've grown up with my parents as the best example of entrepreneurship my whole life. So I always knew that business was something I was interested in. I never really knew what route I wanted to take with it, but was definitely targeting business schools when looking for university.
That's awesome. And so you said you didn't know what route you wanted to go in business. Did you have any inkling? Like, was there anything that kind of stuck out? Ooh, that'd be cool.
Honestly, not really. I think actually one of the components of the class was Sean, as well as a vocations course I took through a program for first-time students at Santa Clara. We focus on like, what is your vocation and what are you interested in doing?
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a passion for education and working towards giving more access to education to people. And knowing that from my vocations course and kind of bringing that down to earth and with Sean's class, it actually eventually led to my first internship after freshman year at an educational nonprofit about a mile away from Santa Clara.
Oh, wow,
So
that's cool.
that was just one way that I started to work towards something I was interested in. But my college process was like zigzags back and forth, trying to figure out what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and many people are like that, right? I mean, that's that's just the way that it goes. So as you were, so let's talk about in class. And obviously, you went through the career launch method. What was it before it was even called the career launch method? But what were some of the things that kind of honed the idea of where you wanted to go as you were going through the program?
Where I wanted to go in terms of
After school.
after school.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that was really stressed was just to try something out that you were interested in. You know, part of the career launch method is research. Research people and organizations that you're interested in. So that definitely helped with, okay, so I'm interested in accounting and, the Big Four route, or, I'm interested in a startup versus a nonprofit versus a corporation. And what kind of a role do I want? Even that helps towards discerning what major you want to go after, even within the business school. So I think a lot of the work that is done at Santa Clara in your freshman year helps business students really figure out kind of what path they want to go down before you have to do any like upper level courses in business or start applying to internships and whatnot.
Gotcha. And so as you were going through this program and you kind of honed in on what did you want to do, what came into focus for you? What did you start to really like, this is what I want to do?
Right. Honestly, it changed every year, so it's really hard to give a straightforward answer to that. So for me at the beginning, I wanted to focus on education immediately. So I worked at a nonprofit. And then after that, I decided on an accounting major. At that point, I thought it was, what made the most sense, would give me the most career opportunities. And I ended up interning at PwC for 2 years. And then I realized that wasn't for me. And then I switched over to startups, which is kind of what I've been in for like the last 4 or 5 years now. So it was like a step in each direction, figuring out, okay, I did it. I liked it. I did this. I didn't like it.
Okay. So you had the nonprofit, then you go to PwC, large company, then you go to startups. I want to talk a little bit about this journey. How many internships did you go through before you ended up with startups?
I did 3 internships.
Really?
Did a nonprofit and then 2 internships at PwC. And then my senior year of college, worked part-time at a startup for like 6 months.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the really important question, right? Getting these internships, you obviously, before you started the search, you knew everybody at the internship, you knew someone at the nonprofit, at PwC, and obviously you knew everybody in startups, right? You were very well connected.
Of course, knew everyone. No. No, it was honestly a lot of research, reaching out, having a lot of these career conversations. I'm sure Sean can tell us more about that, but it was talking to a lot of different people and networking and finding a way to, find myself fitting into a certain company or, getting my foot in the door.
And I think this is what everyone out there, especially all of you other students, as you're listening to Yuli, I want you to understand that. Right? She didn't have these relationships already to get into these internships. She was able to cultivate and develop her way into it. And this is the same that any of you could do as well. So let's go through that. Let's start with the nonprofit. Obviously we don't have time to go into the whole method, here on the live stream. But I'm curious, Yuli, as you were looking into the nonprofit, and you kind of went through that discernment, figuring out where you wanted to go. How did you start to make this happen for yourself?
Right. So I remember that was like an assignment in Sean's class, actually. Once I knew like my vocation, what I thought was my vocation at that point, I knew I wanted to work in education, but on the business side of things, I wasn't going to be trying to intern in the classroom. Um, and I started to list out just organizations in the area just because I wanted something that was local and that I could do while I was still a student at Santa Clara. And then I really hit up LinkedIn. So I think part of our class was, sprucing up our LinkedIn profile, adding in, any sort of clubs and organizations we were part of. We were freshmen. I think it was like my fall quarter. So I, wrote all the clubs I was in my senior year of high school. And so once like my LinkedIn was ready, I started just emailing people to chat with them about just what they do, which is part of this whole career conversation method. You're not calling them up to ask for an interview or that you want a specific job. And that's what I ended up doing with Breakthrough Silicon Valley, which is the organization I ended up working at.
Wow.
I wanted to learn about what they were doing. In the process, had a few conversations with like the managing director, the program manager, told them about, my class, about how I wanted to eventually work in education. And, I had many conversations with them until they finally told me, like, we have this internship position, you're a freshman, so we typically don't give it to underclassmen, but we'd like you to go through the process.
Wow.
And so that's what I ended up doing, and they ended up selecting me for that internship after for the summer of freshman year. But
And this was, again, you knew no one there before.
No one.
Folks, this is the power of kind of understanding how to do things properly, right? So Yuli, after that, you use that essentially the same process to get to PwC. Let's talk about that. What were your lessons that you learned from this first one that were able to translate directly into PwC?
Yeah, it was actually like a simultaneous process. So I ended up applying to Deloitte Next Gen Leaders Conference. It's like this conference they do for freshmen for the summer after their freshman year. And I actually did that probably like a quarter after working, being in Sean's class. He still has the screenshot when I messaged him saying I'd received it. But I basically also networked my way into being like the representative for Santa Clara University at this conference. And that was through meeting the recruiter at this like informational interview, like speed dating workshop we did with Guy's class. I don't know if you know Guy Simpson, but that we did that as kind of like the second class after Sean's class. So it's kind of putting into practice everything we're learning and doing more what they called informational interviews, or their career conversations. And I was at Deloitte, but it was a weird year for them because they didn't offer as many internships. So I actually didn't get offered an internship the following year with them. And me being, the go-getter sophomore, I was like, I have to have an internship this summer. So I reached out to PwC and started networking there with a partner.
Wait. So I want to make sure. So you actually did something with Deloitte, had conversations with them. It didn't go because they had some issues. And why did you do that? To reach out to PwC.
Oh, I knew I wanted to be in accounting. So I was like, if I can't make it happen with, one company, I really wanted to still give it a shot and see if any of the other three, big four accounting firms would take me.
Why not just give up? Why not just say, accounting's not my thing. I don't, do something else. Why did you do that?
That's not what they taught us. No. No, I had nothing to lose. So part of what we learn, it's the worst that can happen is they'll say no to you, but you learn along the process.
Yeah. Were you afraid to do it, or did you just go?
I was pretty afraid to do it. I still remember my first interview in that process when they ask you the typical interview question that I know about, and that's tell me about yourself. Yeah. And the first time you're hit with that question and you don't have your elevator pitch prepared, you like panic and ramble. So I remember doing that and leaving that interview and saying, all right, I need to prepare my elevator pitch. And every interview I've ever been after that has always asked me, tell me about yourself. And I have my little bullet points ready to go.
Awesome, awesome. And I think this is the thing. You faced it, you did it even though you were afraid, right? Even though there was fear. And I don't know where that came up through your journey, but I want to make sure that everybody out there understands this, right? That yes, you can be afraid and you can be fearful that it's not going to work out, but yet Yuli did it anyway, right? And that's the thing. You face that tear barrier, if you will, and then you did it anyway. Okay, so then you start basically courting PwC, and tell us how that turned out, how that ended up going.
Yeah, for sure. And then one thing to add to the fear component before going on, it's, I was a first gen college student, and, a lot of my friends, their parents were like top engineers at local tech companies, or, CEOs of this, lawyers that. And so, coming from this background where my parents only studied up until middle school and, had to immigrate to the US and didn't have this like quote unquote professional background, there was a lot of fear with that, because I didn't have them guiding me through like, oh, this is what you do on that first interview, or, what have you. So there was definitely a lot of fear involved in the process, but I think one of the most important things is just like you only learn by doing it. So that was usually my mindset going into a lot of these interviews where I was scared and, didn't really know how to handle my own. I'm this like 19-year-old sophomore trying to get these internships, was always like panicking a bit before the interviews, but usually in the interviews, everything panned out because I was prepared. So that was just like one thing to add about the fear aspect of it.
Yeah. I'm curious, and, maybe this is more of a self-serving question, but as you went through the method and kind of learned these things, was that helpful to overcoming some of this fear? Or do you think you would have done it just naturally regardless without the training?
It was very helpful. And I honestly don't think I would have done it naturally, even just looking at, fellow classmates who maybe hadn't taken this class with like Sean, or friends who weren't in the business school. A lot of them, it was our junior and senior year, and they still didn't know how to do this process. So I'm honestly really grateful and fortunate that, it's a process I learned like my winter quarter freshman year, because I really do think it shaped a lot of the experiences I was able to acquire just through different internships all throughout college.
And Yuli, it's kind of a superpower, isn't it, when you have kind of these skills? And
For sure.
A lot of people don't understand that it's a superpower. It's something that can set you out from the crowd and apart. So you end up working at PwC, and then next you wanted to get into startups. Let's talk a little bit about that. How did you make that transition from large corporate type of company into what, I think I want to do this whole startup thing?
Yeah, so I did the 2 internships at PwC in their audit practice. Just being an accounting major, it was what worked out the best. And I still thought that it was something I wanted to do post-college. So I ended up actually accepting an offer at the end of my senior year. So I actually got an offer to work in their audit practice, but I wanted to switch over to their consulting practice, which is just seen as like more niche, more prestigious. And I ended up actually interviewing for a position that, wasn't even normally allowed to be offered to students that were from my university, and I didn't get it. So that's just one thing where it's like I shot my shot and didn't get it. I showed up at the interview in New York City and was next to Harvard, Princeton, students from all these Ivy Leagues, but the partners back here in San Francisco, admired my like willingness to try to, get into a practice that wasn't normally offered to us. And I ended up getting an offer for something very similar in San Francisco. So that was, a process of trying to continue to push past the limits of what were set for me.
So here's another time where you went for something and you didn't get it.
Right.
Why did you keep going?
Well, because I said if I can't, it's the whole shoot for the moon, you land in the stars. So my moonshot was like, I want to be working and consulting in New York City. But they're like, we can't give you that, but we'll give you consulting in San Francisco. And then in a few years, you can maybe transfer over. So for me, it was like, that one extra step in the right direction was what I wanted to work towards. The recruiters did let me know, they're like, if we can't give you this offer in San Francisco, you lose any offer from PwC, before going into that process. And I was like, it's a risk I'm willing to take.
Awesome. Wow. Well, that's fantastic. And then, so you get that offer, and then where does the startup, pivot come? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So that offer was like fall quarter of senior year. And I ended up just doing a lot of extra classes when I was in college. So I actually graduated at the end of fall quarter, but I still wanted to be on campus. So I wanted to make a productive use of my time. So I decided, I started to hear about this startup called One Rent that a few friends from Santa Clara University had started about like a year prior to that. And it's a property management platform. They still exist today. And they were in very early stages, pre-Series A, which is their first round of capital, basically. And so I ended up applying to be a sales representative with them. And I honestly had no idea, really what a startup was, or, you see these movies or you hear these stories being in Silicon Valley. And my previous experience had been nonprofits and like PwC, which is very, corporate, huge company. So it was honestly like a really great experience working there. I was there for 6 months. And that was really my intro into the startup world and what would later, become like the career.
I'm curious what it was that kind of got you hooked in the startup world.
I really enjoyed having the responsibility of just like, if you don't do the job you have to do, like things go wrong. And I felt that at PwC, if I did something wrong, there was still like 15 people after me that were like each checking everything I did. So even though you're learning a lot, and I learned so much from PwC, you have this like safety net, especially when you're an intern in a first year, even like a second year. And for example, at the startup, it was like, all right, we want to launch this campaign and like, we have to hit these sales numbers. And if we don't, like, we're not getting the $2 million investment, Yeah. So it was kind of like, if we slacked off, it's like, no one else is doing that job for you. It's like, you have to do it. And it was like a certain like thrill and excitement to owning so much of it.
Okay. And so you did that. And then what did you do next to get into startups? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so that's, it's like, I've gone through this with like Sean before. It's like a huge story. I'll try to be as like clear as possible, but I worked at the startup my senior year. And so Santa Clara, we do graduation beginning of June, I want to say, end of May. And so I still had this offer from PwC that I had accepted. I had decided like, that's still what I was doing post-college. The startup still felt like a little too, I wasn't sure if like I wanted to take the risk of letting go of like a big name company and like a very stable job and going with a startup that not many people knew about and its success wasn't guaranteed.
So you had actually accepted the role at PwC.
Yeah, I accepted that since like the beginning of my senior year when I got it. Okay. But it was to start until like 9 or 10 months later. Okay. And to start up, I saw that as like a temporary job that I did, while I was graduating. And I never expected to like it as much as I did. I was the PwC route 100%. Yeah. And then I'd say like a few months before graduating from college, I started to really think about like what decision I was going to make. Was I going to continue with this startup with my friends? Was I going to go to PwC and work in consulting? And something didn't seem right, because in the back of my mind, I'd always kind of thought of this idea that I wanted to live in Mexico. My family is Mexican, even though I was born and raised in Seattle. I always felt I hadn't fully experienced the culture. And so it was kind of like looming in the back of my mind. I hadn't really expressed it to too many people. And then had a few conversations with some mentors, some professors, just being like, I really want to maybe go to Mexico. And everyone was like, don't do it. Like, it's such a bad idea. You have such great opportunities here. And in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, like I still really want to do it. And that's where I basically decided like a week before graduation, I decided that I was moving to Mexico City, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but that the first step was turning down the 2 offers I had, which was at PwC and the startup, and then I would figure it out.
Okay. So we got to talk about this. So you have an offer from PwC, an offer from a startup, and you said, you know what? I'm going to move to Mexico instead, because you knew how many people in Mexico City?
Not very many, and I'd never been there.
And decided that I'm going to, and what did you want to do when you got to Mexico City? Where did you want to work? What did you want to do?
I honestly didn't even know. So.
And when did you make that decision?
Probably like a week before graduation, I called my parents and I was like, I'm graduating in a week. I'm jobless. So I'm coming home because I'm going to figure out what I'm doing, but I'm moving to Mexico.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So, wow. That's just awesome. So you figure this all out. You move to Mexico City, and then what? Tell us about this.
Yeah, well, coming home after graduating, I really wasn't stressed about it. I knew that eventually I'd find something I wanted to do. And maybe in the back of my mind, it was just like having been prepared with everything I had learned, knowing that even though I didn't have a single connection over there, I could reach out to people, find some kind of common ground, learn about what they were doing, and eventually, hopefully choose something I wanted to do. And so even if that wasn't as like fully present in my mind, I think subconsciously I was kind of like riding on that experience and knowledge. And honestly, it's a lot of it, what I used throughout college, and, a lot of the things I learned through Sean and through the business school. So it's why I wasn't stressed about it, but everyone around me was kind of just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm sure your parents were thrilled, or what did they say?
Oh, they were so upset. Yeah.
Okay. So you get to Mexico City with no job, find, at least someone to stay with and figure it out. What happens next?
So I actually did the process from Seattle. So really? I ended up, I literally made an Excel spreadsheet, and I started just like combing through LinkedIn of just anyone who could even be like a second or third degree connection in Mexico City. And that was one of my process, like part of my process was researching people, and the other one was researching companies. I was looking at PwC in Mexico, seeing if they'd be willing to give me an offer. I was looking at like the startup world, and I was looking at more like financial firms. Like those were kind of like the 3 different tiers I had. And then that kind of wasn't working for a few months. It took me 6 months to find a job. So I graduated in June. And so at first I was kind of just like applying to the random job post, through LinkedIn, through the company website, and they'd all say like, oh, this is great, but like we want you here for an in-person interview, move to Mexico first, and then we'll interview you. But that seemed like too big of a risk for me. I was like, shoot, what if they like don't hire me? So then I actually took a step back, and then I started researching people. So I was like, all right, I need to find someone who like might be willing to like reach out an arm and give me an intro to someone, And so I eventually narrowed it down to 3 people who had connections to Santa Clara University in Mexico City. And I gave them like just like a quick message on LinkedIn, said, hey, like I'd love to hear about what you do over there and what your experience as like an American living in Mexico City has been like. I'm a recent grad, just starting to, investigate. At no point did I say like I'm looking for a job over there. And that is where I ended up connecting with this guy he had graduated from Santa Clara a few years before me, and he was working at this like really up and coming startup in Mexico City. And, I chatted with him, and he's like, this company really isn't for you. We aren't hiring for what you're doing, but I'm going to connect you to my friend who is like super connected in like the startup world over here. And she is now like my mentor. I still talk to her. Like, it's one of those things where she helped me get that first interview to get that first job in Mexico City. But I really talked with her at length of like, what did I want to do and why I wanted to do it. So before she even introduced me to anyone or told me to research the industry, at first it was just like, I want to work in Mexico City. I look back at my emails from back then and I was so vague. But eventually I was able to hone in on like, what am I looking for? What companies could be good? I'd go out and research if they had any open positions, reach out to the managers of those areas, whether it be marketing or sales or business development. And then once I'd reach out, I'd see if there was like a common connection or not. And it was honestly months of Zoom, or I think back then it was Skype, but like Skype conversations. And all of them were just coined as career conversations to learn about what they did, because I was trying to enter an industry I knew nothing about in a country I'd never lived in. So it was really my only option. I couldn't say, hey, hire me.
Yeah. I mean, let that stick out for everyone out there who's watching this. A job, a country I didn't know about, and an industry I didn't know about, and she's having these conversations that ultimately, what did it lead to?
Yeah, ultimately it led to, me speaking with the right people, having the right position that I had enough experience in for them to take this risk in hiring this American who they didn't even know if would last a week in the country. And I ended up getting an offer at the end of November of 2016. So 5 months after graduating, and I moved on January 1st, 2017.
Wow.
With a job in Mexico City once I moved there.
Wow. And what did you do? How long were you in Mexico City, Yuli?
I was there for 3 years.
Wow. And so what type of stuff did you do in Mexico City? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so when I first moved there, I was working at a startup accelerator, which is what they do is they provide programs for entrepreneurs who have a startup. And we specifically worked with companies that were just figuring out their business model. So these startups, they had a really great idea and I had a great team, but didn't really know how it was going to pan out. So I was working there, and that was my first job. I was there for 6 months, and I was working on community building. So a lot of my job was networking within the industry, going to events. If we had a startup that was working in energy, I'd go to events focused on that so I could meet mutual connections that would be beneficial for them. Wow. So it was a lot of networking, and I really enjoyed it there. And then while I was doing that, I had always thought of this other company I really wanted to work at, but they had actually turned me down like back in September, saying like, let us know when you're in Mexico City. And so, I ended up meeting a partner there at one of the events I was doing, and kept in contact with him. And eventually a position opened up that was well above the experience level I had. So I saw it as an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And I ended up interviewing for it. And, I actually first had contact with them with career conversations when I was in Seattle. Wow. And, I kept in constant contact with the recruiter, with the partners, and with the team until I finally got a job there. And I was there for 2.5 years.
Wow. And what did you do at that firm?
Yeah, so I did a lot of different things there. So I basically got promoted within the company, but I started off being a project manager there. So I basically worked with executing all of their programs for their for entrepreneurs. So basically, I would set like the 6-month timeline for this program for the entrepreneur. What are they going to do? There's the part of like working with consultants to figure out their business model, actually launching their product, working financially with them as well. Yeah. So it was a lot of different things. I ended up working over 2.5 years. I worked with over 150 entrepreneurs. Wow. all over Latin America. And then at the end, the last probably like 6 or 7 months, I switched over to a different team within the company to launch a new fund. So it was this new financial product that we were designing, and then we launched it. So at first, my job was more like strategic community building, working with people, I guess, and then it switched over to being more heavily financial and kind of acting as an entrepreneur, but within the company.
Did you like that, putting together a fund to invest in companies?
Yeah, I loved it. Honestly, all the work I did in Mexico City, I learned so much, and can't complain about anything I did over there.
Wow. So that is really awesome. I just noticed that we have gone a little over time, so I apologize for keeping you longer than we had expected. I want to, Sean, kind of have you chime in here, a couple thoughts just about Yuli's journey and how it relates to Career Launch, and then we'll kind of wrap up this live stream.
Yeah, in so many ways, Yuli's journey is the essence of what the Career Launch method is. It's starting with nothing. It's starting with just thinking about organizations you might want to work for, knowing that that initial list is going to change in 2 weeks, maybe not 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, definitely in 2 years, but at least starting somewhere, right? And then being intentional about taking time to do the research to identify people that could be strategically helpful to where you want to go. And Yuli did both those things several times, as we heard throughout her journey. And then we also heard her speak about getting no, being disappointed and not getting positions on multiple occasions, but being resilient and not letting that affect her self-esteem, and just continuing to persist and continuing to take action, because taking action gets rewarded. And you can see that through Yuli's story. What's really amazing to me, a lot of amazing stuff in this conversation, but Yuli, as a first-generation college student, you had 2 job offers. One, I would imagine, from a big 4 accounting firm, which was a significant amount of money that you turned down, and then drove home without a job, and then spent 6 months following what was in your heart, and then to get a position in Mexico, and just trusting and knowing that you can create opportunity from scratch without having any connections. And it's just, it's so great to relive this with you. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, that was just a really awesome story, Yuli. Thank you, Sean, for that. Everyone out there, tune in next week. We're going to be right back here with another live stream. Also, if you have a chance, we have a webinar that's coming up. It's actually on the 17th of February at 3:30. We'll have more information coming like that for that. And also, if you'd like to start understanding what Yuli was talking about, what she learned in that class, you can get 2 free chapters of the upcoming book. You can go to, it's scrolling across the bottom, it's launchyourcareerbook.com/preview. You get 2 complimentary chapters, and you can start understanding how you can work this process. Some of the things that Yuli was talking about here that have helped her, from working at the nonprofit to working at PwC to getting into startups, and that entire journey. So go and get those 2 free chapters so that you kind of see how this all works. That's going to be it for today, everyone. We certainly appreciate you joining us on our live stream. Feel free, if there's someone you think needs to hear this story that can inspire them, that they want to know about how to do some of these things that Yuli was talking about, please like us, comment us, share this information with everyone else. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great to see you.